There is something timeless about Danish modern as an aesthetic. It feels sophisticated without feeling constrained or uncreative. In fact, there's a lot of variation under the umbrella of Danish modern, especially in ceramics, which could get away with a lot more ornamentation than furniture could. Key to that variation is the studio model. For Danish ceramic art, industrial workshops began emerging in the mid-1800s as the Industrial Revolution began to make the tools of craft more accessible outside of the elite cultural centers. Peter Ibsen's Werkstad, and after his death, P. Ibsen's Anka, and Hjort terracotta fabric on the island of Bornholm proved to be significant early on, experimenting by the turn of the century with materials and decorative styles that would not otherwise become popular until the 1920s. The industrial studio is a little bit different than an artist's private workshop or even from a classroom. Individual artists could and did create pieces in their private studios. This is how an artist like Bertel Thorvaldsen created all of their sculptural pieces. However, the introduction of the industrial process to ceramic production meant that teams of artists could create pieces in much larger quantities than any individual artist was able to do. After the 1925 Paris World's Fair, which kickstarted several careers among Danish ceramicists, we see an explosion in the number of studios. In 1926, Carl Hollier, the stoneware director of Royal Copenhagen, founded Københavns Stentrøjsbranderi with Arne Bang, where Axel Salto also began his work. In 1929, Natalie Krebs and Gunnar Nieland rented a studio from the legendary Patrick Nordstrom, which became Saxbo. Other independent studios emerged throughout the 1930s and 40s, creating a vibrant scene. By the 1950s, the culture of these studios was pretty clear. The studio heads, often designers themselves, would hire other artists to create designs for the company. These designers might work on-site or remotely, sending in designs to teams at the studio. They will work very closely with potters and glazers to create a final body of work.
In fact, Salto was working in the stoneware cellar all the time, and he just sat there and worked. He didn't chat with anybody.
Wow.
And then Gerd Buglen did her work outside of the stoneware. She didn't work there, right in the place. She did it outside of the area.
Once the final designs were made, replication began. In Royal Copenhagen's stoneware department, most designs were created from molds, which talented ceramicists would use to replicate signature works. This worked to train up-and-coming ceramicists, while also creating inventory for the shops.
I could work 6 days duplicating the other artist's work, and then the 1 day a week I could work on my own things. So I worked on making some of Salto's pieces, and also Knud Kuhn.
Yeah.
And that was done by pressing clay into 2 halves of a mold, and then you press the mold together. And the next day you took the mold apart, and you had a whole piece which had mold lines on it, and you had to remove those and clean it up and get it ready to dry and be bisque fired and then fired.
Nancy's story is in many ways typical. The story of Danish modern is in many ways a story of tradition across generations. Ideally, the constant movement of designers between studios fostered a very collaborative atmosphere. Pieces sold in retail stores were chosen by committees of artists, and that incentivized everyone to be on good terms with each other.
But the permanent exhibition, was owned and driven by artists.
Yes.
And to get in there, you had to go through a censorship.
Yes.
To be allowed to exhibit there. But they sold it up.
Like at the Charlottenborg exhibition of paintings and so. That was also only allowed if you have been.
You went through
Selection.
Selection.
Yeah, there was a committee who sat there and
said that's good enough. That's not good enough.
Yeah.
And she was on that board for 15 years or something.
However, the industry could still be cutthroat. In 1957, following a solo exhibition at the retail giant Ilums Bollikhus by the studio Palshus, the relationship between Palshus and Saxbo fell apart. Natalie Krebs accused Per Lindemann-Schmidt of plagiarizing her closely guarded glaze recipes. However, other economic concerns may have played a part in this feud.
The big difference between them was that in Saxbo, they hardly made any series.
It was one-off pieces.
Yeah.
It was all one of a kind.
Yo.
And father, and but there was no question about the quality. And father made more things more effectively, same shapes sometimes in series, but his quality was equal to hers.
That was her beef.
Tensions aside, the studio model proved to be an intensely creative milieu for many years. However, by the end of the 1960s, the situation was changing. Several crucial designers passed away in that decade, leading to some stagnation in designs. At the same time, public tastes for Danish modern in the United States was beginning to decline, and studio revenues followed suit. Concurrently, a series of retirements or deaths led to the shuttering of studios. Saxbo closed in 1968. Palshus shuttered its doors in 1971, and Niels Thorsen's death in 1975 marked the start of a tumultuous decade for Royal Copenhagen. A 50-year-old model for how to create remarkable, functional ceramics drew to a close, and artists returned to their private studios to create increasingly experimental, increasingly sculptural pieces. Overall, I have mixed feelings about the end of the studio model. On the one hand, its collapse led to an explosion of creativity. The contemporary Danish design is incredibly inventive, in ways that are just delightful to behold. Design by committees of artists is great to create functional wares, but the extravagance of postmodern design is just wonderful to see. And ultimately, I think this is a good thing. We want highly experimental art pieces to coexist with more functional wares. But the collapse with the studio model comes with some consequences. Let me use this piece as an example. A Palshus catalog from the late 1950s shows that this exact vase was sold for 14.5 Danish kroner. That's about $35 in today's money. That's just not affordable anymore. And it's that mix of quality and affordability that made Danish Modern so special. It was this brief moment in contemporary design history where artists could design for other artists, and by setting the standards of good taste, they could make livings doing designs while making good pieces available to almost everybody. And it really pays off. You can feel the quality in these pieces just by handling them. In today's economy of mass-produced, cheaply designed pieces, it's hard to get this anymore, and I think we're missing out. There's a reason why we consider Danish Modern timeless now, and it's the workmanship of these studios that we have to thank for it.